Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the How a Better Understanding of Communication and Behavioral Styles Increase Trust, Influence, and Engagement webinar. I am Kim Rivera, Marketing Manager at the Myers-Briggs Company, and I'm happy to be moderating today's webinar, which will run for approximately 1 hour, and the last 10 minutes will be reserved for answering your questions. So submit them at any time using the question function in the webinar controls. And to proactively answer the always important question, yes, this webinar is being recorded, and we'll be sending out an email with link to the recording and slides within the next few days. So I am happy to introduce our speaker, Rich Thompson. Rich is the Senior Director of Research at the Myers-Briggs Company, and he leads the company's research efforts globally and provides strategic input on cross-functional product development efforts. Rich has extensive background in developing assessments and surveys for use in both organizational information gathering and predictive research. So welcome, Rich. I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you very much, Kim. Hi, everybody. Thank you for taking time out of your busy day to join us. Hopefully we'll have a very interesting session here talking about the FIRO-B and the MBTI. So what are we going to talk about? So we have a few objectives for the session today. The first is to highlight how the FIRO-B assessment can add value to your use of the MBTI assessment, which we think most of you already know how to use. We're going to talk about how both of these frameworks work together to add value in leadership coaching and working with your clients. We're going to show how the FIRO can add value to teams compared to what you already get out of the MBTI, and where you might use both or either, and when you might want to choose those. Also look at how these two frameworks complement each other and where there are some differences. And finally, to talk about some MBTI and FIRO resources that we have available where they can be used in your training work. So the first question, the main issue that we're talking about here is creating powerful people and why we should care about it. And in organizational development and coaching efforts, typically our goal is to enhance people's potential, to make them better. But also, what we also get out of those efforts is removing some of the interference or challenges that can occur when people are working together interpersonally. So for example, not knowing how someone else likes to do things or how they like to approach the world can create interference, challenges with trust and engagement. And we work with them to point out their own and others' preferences in an attempt to help them work together more effectively to achieve great things. So we might ask, why is it that people operate below their capability, or why teams operate below their capability? And there's a variety of reasons for that. The first is a lack of awareness, or really self-awareness, and that people really don't know what they don't know, and they often don't know a lot about themselves, and they might not have great insights into others. And they might not know how their behaviors impact how others react to their behavior. They might not understand the values and experiences of those people and what drives those behaviors. It might be that they simply lack some skills in terms of interpersonal skills and understanding, how to work with people. It might be that they lack some support from their boss, their team, or their coach. Typically, the FIRO and the MBTI are both focused on the awareness, understanding, and then the training provides some skills that help them use that knowledge more effectively in working with others. So the MBTI and the FIRO work together in that they both help to build potential and performance. The MBTI really focuses on personality, and embedded in that model of personality are some cognitive things, how you make decisions, how you take information, your orientation to the world. FIRO-B is more focused on interpersonal behaviors and interpersonal perception. So we'll get into a little more details on that in a moment, but it provides us with both insight into ourselves and others, and allows us to behave in a more intentional way rather than just kind of being driven by our needs or our underlying personality. So a very quick overview of the MBTI framework. You'll recall that there are 4 preferences that we measure, and hopefully you can see the arrow on my screen. But so the 2 middle pairs of preferences deal with cognitive things, So how we take in information and how we make decisions, sensing and intuition is how you take in information, thinking and feeling decisions. The outer two have to deal with orientation of energy, so extroversion and introversion, and judging and perceiving. Each person who takes the MBTI gets one of those letters, and those combine into what is here a very colorful version of a type table, with which I hope you are all familiar. So the MBTI is particularly useful for understanding how people take information, make decisions, and their orientation to the world and life. It's particularly useful once you understand your own preferences and others in understanding how other people approach things differently, and by understanding that allows you to interact much more effectively than if you don't understand that not everyone is like you. And the MBTI can also be used for both individual level coaching, individual development, individual training, but also for team development and training, and also as a structure for understanding the culture of an organization. So the FIRO-B is different than the MBTI, and it has 3 different need areas. So in the work that Schutz did originally with FIRO-B, working with submarine crews, based on his observations, he noticed that people seem to have these 3 different interpersonal needs. They had the need for inclusion, which is really belongingness, getting along into relationships. They had a need for control or influence, whether they like to be in charge or be told what to do. And a need for affection, which is really better. Oftentimes the word affection seems to bother people in our modern society. So another way to think of that is connectedness or interpersonal connectedness. We have another instrument called the FIRO Business. It's a shorter version of the FIRO-B. It gets at the same things. And there, for business purposes, we changed these terms to involvement, influence, and connection, again, primarily because the term affection seemed to be bothersome for some people, and sometimes the term control as well. So for each of those needs, you can express, or I should say you have expressed needs and you have wanted needs. So the expressed needs are the behaviors that you initiate and engage in towards others, that you reach out to other people and say, here's essentially my level of needed control or needed affection, and then wanted. So each person has a certain amount of those needs that they want to receive from others. And when you combine those, you get this scoring matrix that we use for the FIRO, which includes inclusion, affection, and control, and then the expressed and wanted behaviors or needs. And so for each person, when we measure the FIRO, we get an expressed inclusion score, expressed control, and so forth. And then there's also scoring, and that's where the colors come in. You also get a total expressed score and a total wanted score. And you also get total scores for inclusion, control, and affection. And pardon me, I did get a cold over the weekend. Hopefully this works. But you also get an overall score. And you can see how those go together. Here we're primarily going to focus on these central boxes and looking at those scores. Excuse me. So for the FIRO, when we're looking at expressed and wanted inclusion, control, and affection, scores can range from low, medium, to high. And you can see here how those distribute. 0 to 2 is low, 3 to 6 is medium, 7 to 9 is high. Scores show both frequency and selectivity, meaning how often do you do it and to whom do you do it? How many people do you do it? So you can have a high expressed score for something, which means you're likely to do that often, and you're likely to do it to many people. If you have a low score, you're likely to do it rarely and with a very select group of people. So here's an example where we're going to show a couple of examples where scores can provide some information about how well people get along. So in this case, John and Jasper both have, or should say John has a high expressed inclusion score, Jasper has a high wanted inclusion score. So as John is interacting with Jasper, he's showing his high expressed inclusion. Jasper likes getting that high inclusion. They get along just fine in terms of the inclusion. Similarly, John has a low wanted control, Jasper has a high wanted control. So if John is going to give, Jasper is going to give direction to John, John's happy to take that direction. In another example where they don't necessarily get along, we see here that Barney has a low expressed inclusion score. Mitchell has a high wanted inclusion score. So when Barney's making some plans, for example, he may or may not bother to mention to Mitchell that he's doing it. And Mitchell might be frustrated and hurt and think, well, Barney doesn't like me or something like that, when in fact it's really just Barney doesn't tend to include a lot of people when he's doing things. Similarly here, we see a low wanted affection score for Barney and a high wanted affection score for Mitchell. So as Mitchell's going through the day interacting with Barney and, putting out behaviors that are somewhat affectionate, meaning, hey, let's connect on a deeper interpersonal level, and Barney somewhat rebuffs those, again, they might find that, Mitchell might be frustrated with Barney and, think, well, perhaps he doesn't like me, or we have some sort of issues. So you can see from these two different examples that the alignment of these different scores can lead to either interpersonal closeness and connection or lead to some interpersonal problems. So the FIRO is particularly useful for understanding your interpersonal needs in these areas that we've just talked about. It's also very useful for appreciating differences in others' interpersonal needs and allows for more effective engagement and trust and influence. In terms of knowing what they want and need, I'm able to flex towards their needs, and perhaps they're able to flex towards mine. And just like the MBTI, it's also useful at the individual level for coaching or individual training and development, team development, and also provides an overview of organizational culture. So I made a point that we were going to talk about the relationship between the two scores. This is some data from European data on the FIRO and MBTI. And going across, as we often have in our assessments, we have little codes. This is expressed inclusion and control and affection. And then here we have the MBTI stuff going down. We've highlighted any correlations that were greater than 0.2. And so you'll notice here that the extroversion-introversion preference from the MBTI is correlated with the expressed inclusion and wanted inclusion scores. The negative correlation means that as inclusion goes up, extroversion goes up. Similarly, as affection goes up, extroversion goes up. So basically, these two needs are related to introversion and extroversion on the MBTI. You'll notice that the correlations are not super huge. They're large, but not super huge. So they're not measuring exactly the same thing. There's some elements that differ between the two, where the extroversion introversion is really about energy, what energizes you. These are not necessarily tapping into that same thing, and perhaps are a little bit more akin to gregariousness or friendliness. You'll notice too, for thinking and feeling, there's a negative correlation. Again, the negative correlation between control is more thinking, and then there's positive correlations on affection. So people who have a preference for feeling might also be seen as a little bit more wanting and expressing affection. You'll also notice the judging perceiving correlations are essentially zero. There's just no relationship there. For most of the sensing and intuition correlations, they're pretty low. These two are close, but we're not going to necessarily focus on them. So another way of looking at these relationships is presented here. So extroversion and introversion are correlated with the FIRO scores, right? So the opposite ways of directing and receiving energy are related to FIRO, as are the opposite ways to decide and come to conclusions, thinking and feeling. Sensing, intuition, judging, perceiving are not really relevant there. And so that allows us to look at some different combinations. For those who are familiar with the MBTI, you'll know that a lot of times the different preference pairs are combined in different ways to give us different information. And so here you can see a combination of energy and judgment, orientation of energy and judgment. And so we're going to look at how MBTI type, or these combinations go with the FIRO result. So here's an example where the FIRO adds information. Here we have two pairs of people who have EF and IT preferences respectively. But take a look at the differences in their FIRO scores. This helps to show how the FIRO can add to the MBTI. So Meredith and Sandra both have a preference for E and F. Remember those combinations we looked at before. But their affection scores are very different. Meredith has both pretty high scores, and Sandra is more in the middle. You might expect Meredith to come across as very supportive and in an open way, while Sandra might be more selective in her behaviors around this area and share them with a smaller set of people, so that frequency and selectivity again. You'll also notice that Allison and Sarah both have preferences for introversion and thinking. Sorry again. Allison's inclusion scores are in the lower range, whereas Sarah's are more in the middle. So Sarah may come across as more visible and initiating and welcoming of contact than Allison. They have similar wanted affection scores. Sarah's expressed affection is a little bit higher, suggesting that she may show warmth, support, and openness to a greater extent than does Allison. They all are medium scores, so these might be more nuanced differences than something that's really easy to observe. But the point is that the FIRO adds some additional information here over what you'd get from the combinations from the MBTI to help understand how and why these folks behave. So control was not related to the MBTI. And so let's take a look at some of those things and how they might be different for people. So you'll notice here that for people who have, so if you look at the little graphic, there's high expressed and low expressed, low wanted and high wanted. So people who have low wanted and high expressed control needs are likely to be influencers, likely to be leaders. They're likely to take on responsibility and compete with other people to increase the things that they're able to do. People with low expressed and low wanted are more likely to have a live and let live approach. They don't necessarily want to manage others, and they value their own independence. It might be that they try to own their own area and control that area and kind of keep other people out of it. They may seem low-key, but if you break their kind of rules, that you might get pushback that you just don't expect from them. So for people who are high expressed and high wanted in control, they're likely to really like structured settings. They want really clear structures, rules, policies, procedures, how things get done. They're likely to be respectful of authority and a hierarchical leader. People who have low expressed and high wanted control are likely to give direction, ask for clarification. They want clear expectations. They invest in the system, and they're likely to be a loyal and dependable supporter. So when we look at how MBTI type and control play out, here we have some other profiles where we're gonna look at. In this case, we have higher expressed control and low to medium wanted control, even though one of the folks is an EF here, Meredith, and Allison is an IT. So their expressed control is fairly high, so they're likely to take control, be a leader. This person is also likely to take control and be a leader. But you'll notice that with this feeling preference for Meredith, her control might be more through interpersonal interactions, whereas Allison's might be more through logic and dictating what to do. If we look at the Sandra-Sarah comparison, Sandra is likely to prefer structure and to express and want direction and structure in a fairly balanced way. Likewise for Sarah, although her medium to low scores, she may come across as reasonable, self-contained, and self-sufficient in her approach when it comes to structure and direction. But you'll notice that she has some higher affection scores, and so it might be somewhat warm in terms of how she does that. So here, the information about control, which is not related to the MBTI, gives you some other insights into how people might go about influencing others, building trust, and working effectively. So now I'm going to just kind of walk through an example. I'll let you read the slide. But sometimes the combination of MBTI and FIRO scores help people make sense of themselves. So in this example, Peter here has a dilemma on his TF preferences, and by separating out the element of personal warmth and openness from the cognitive preference for logical decision-making by the MBTI, it allowed him to gain some insights into why he differs from other people who are ENTPs. Similarly, again, I'll let you read the slide. Beth makes sense of information about herself that causes others to sometimes question her feeling preference from the MBTI. She's confident in her decision-making approach, and it's based primarily on personal values. But her style of taking charge and keeping her own counsel comes from her interpersonal needs profile of FIRO, which others might be confused that she has a thinking or a judging preference, even though she doesn't. So now we're going to kind of move on. That's kind of a combination of how type and FIRO work together. We'll look at some applications of these in coaching. So the MBTI in coaching provides you with a number of benefits, primarily in understanding self and others. As far as understanding self, it helps to raise the awareness of your own strengths of your type, recognize when your preferences are out of balance and the impact of having your preferences out of balance in terms of how it impacts you. And for those who are more sophisticated users of the MBTI, allows you to integrate type dynamics and develop those in coaching conversations in terms of what people might see and how they might react to you based on your type. But in terms of understanding others, it allows you to explore attitudes and differences, attitudes you have towards other types and how some of those types are different. It helps you to enhance your communication, again, work effectively to build some trust and some engagement. And it might also help you to enable those more effective interpersonal working relationships with that knowledge of type. FIRO, when used in coaching, helps to explain how interpersonal needs drive behavior and impact relationships. Like the MBTI, the needs tend to drive your behaviors. Understanding your needs in terms of the differences between your expressed and your wanted and the three different measures that are there, and understanding how other people might be different from you allows for flexing of one's style and helps you to increase trust and influence. Like the MBTI, it's really about understanding self and others and that self-awareness, and allows people to unlock greater performance in the organization and reduce interpersonal tensions. So one way of thinking about both of these assessments really is through this idea of the Johari Window. Both the MBTI and the FIRO lend themselves to coaching goals that can be illustrated by this model. Both help increase self-awareness. Individuals become more aware of their former blind spots and increase their effectiveness. So the blind spots are the things that they might not know about themselves, but others do know. And by understanding more about both your personality type and your needs from the FIRO, you can maybe identify those blind spots. Oh, I had no idea this was happening. Similarly, both tools help and indicate where you have needs and intentions are in a situation and break down the facade so that others can understand, so you can understand others as well. Oftentimes, we interpret other people's behavior in a more negative light, because we don't understand what's driving their behavior. So both of these instruments together can really help to expand what you know about yourself and what you know about others and work together more effectively. So, like the MBTI, no FIRO profile is good or bad. It's all about flexibility. Where a person appears inflexible about the interpersonal behaviors that they show, for example, they'll never take control or they always take control, or they never share any interpersonal information, or they always share maybe too much interpersonal information, regardless of the situation that they're in, is where the FIRO can help that person understand how to be more flexible and flex given the situation. Can also help you to gain insight into your own interpersonal needs and the drivers that increase the choice and flexibility of behavior. So again, thinking of that Johari Window, understanding some of your own blind spots, understanding some of other people's facades, allows you to make some choices and flex your behavior rather than kind of being driven by your own personality type. And understanding these allows us really to work more effectively together. So if you communicate and share, hey, this is what I need, this is my type preferences, here's your needs and your type preferences, we can take those into account when we're trying to work together. So this image shows that while the FIRO looks at surface behaviors, like the water lily on the surface of a pond, this behavior can have deep roots. And flexible behavior in areas of inclusion always joining, never joining, for example, may point to underlying concerns about acceptance, belonging, and maybe even personal significance. So although this instrument is looking at those surface level behaviors, there is an opportunity while you're doing some coaching or individual training to get a deeper understanding of maybe some of the things that are driving this person that are much, much deeper than just things we see on the surface. And these can be very powerful insights that are gained while you're coaching or working with this person to help unlock the potential of that individual. So we've talked a little bit about FIRO, and we've talked a little bit about MBTI. It's a very terse overview of how they go together. And I just do want to point out that they're very powerful instruments used together, and we've done a lot of the heavy lifting for you. And we have this leadership report that combines the FIRO and the MBTI, and combines both of those, the preferences from type, the needs from the FIRO, and gives you information about your leadership style from both instruments, and helps you, if you're working with somebody, to coach and walk them through that information, and also explains how this can impact the culture of the organization and how you might derive power in an organizational situation. So we've done a lot of the heavy lifting for you here. So to move on to a coaching example, so we have an example here of a manager who is not really having very many difficulties. The MBTI, Rob was an ESTP, was useful. The manager likes to be hands-on and to fix things as they come up. He expects his team to be responsive in a flexible way. As part of his coaching, he became aware that his style was not as structured as some people of the team would like, and that more structure would benefit the performance of his team. So what Rob did here was he said, I have a person on my team who really likes to organize and plan things, and as part of their career development track anyway, they need to do some of that. So I'm going to delegate that part of my role to this person and allow them to do that, and that worked really effectively. When looking at the FIRO scores, we see a different picture in the expressed versus wanted needs. Rob came across as confident in taking control and giving direction, but with his lower expressed affection score, he tended to do so in a very task-focused way. His medium expressed inclusion scores, combined with his control score, saw him calling meetings when needed to move a task forward. As an example, his wanted scores show a different picture. Someone who's not wanting to attend meetings above and beyond what is absolutely needed, and he might be reluctant to attend meetings that he doesn't see a purpose for. These aren't rewarding to him. Some people enjoy meetings for the social aspects of it, and that was not working for Rob. He didn't like to take direction from others. However, with his higher wanted affection score, he was a lot more responsive to praise and appreciation than people would have guessed from his expressed behavior. His action plans included being more open to suggestions from his team and to being more open to more personal interaction and discussion. He did show development in this area, particularly with his team, and this was expressed in the enjoyment and levels of patience in helping junior members develop their technical skills, so he still had a technical focus. That's just an example of where you can use these things together and how it worked for this particular client. So we talked about applying the application of MBTI and FIRO in teams. Here's an example of what the MBTI is typically used for in teams. The MBTI, oftentimes, when a team situation, there's some conflict, there's some communication issues, they struggle to solve problems or come to closure. And the MBTI is really useful for that because you can understand, okay, here's your preferences, here's their preferences, here's the team's preferences, and this is how you interact to solve some problems. This image is from the team report, and for example, if for an ESTJ team, it gives some blind spots and suggested remedies for those. For the FIRO, there's a whole lot of different uses in teams. So, for example, you can get information about whether or not people, it's important for people to belong in teams. You might get some insights into why it is some people don't seem to participate in meetings. You can get some insights into whether or not people want to be highly visible or kind of work behind the scenes. and you can get some information about recognition and attention that people desire. The MBTI also can provide some information on the visibility and recognition as well. You'll also gain some insights about structure and flexibility. Is there a one best structure for this team? Some teams like structure, some teams like flexibility, and you can negotiate how that's going to work. You can get a sense of how people will react to authority and maybe to your leadership style. You can get a sense of how people want to divvy up different roles and responsibilities. You can also understand a little bit more about how people make decisions and share that decision-making information. And for affection and connection in particular, you can get a sense of, where are some of the issues with trust? People who have very low wanted affection, often are, perceived or low expressed affection are perceived as being mistrustful because they don't share any interpersonal information. So knowing something about, so-and-so just doesn't do that will help you overcome maybe some perceived trust issues. So there's a lot of different uses for the FIRO with teams, and it gives you insight in some areas that are shared by the MBTI, but also some areas that the MBTI doesn't necessarily give you a lot of information on. The FIRO model also links very well to Tuckman's model of team formation, making a great frame of reference for a team development event at the outset of creating a team and getting them started. Most of us are probably familiar with the forming, storming, norming, performing model. What we find is that the interpersonal needs fit nicely with this model, where as the team is forming, the interpersonal needs that are most important sort of follow along. So while forming, inclusion needs are the ones that are most important. During the storming phase, it's often about control. During the norming stage, affection issues often play out in that this is where we are now figuring out how we're going to work together and interpersonally be effective. And then we get to the performing stage. Interestingly enough, should this team disband after their tasks are complete, we move through the FIRO in the opposite direction, where first there's some sadness at the loss of the team. There's the breakdown of the control structures as things are being disassembled. And finally, there's some questions about, I wonder if these people ever talk to me. But the FIRO can play a role as you're working with the team in these different stages and help you to figure out when you might want to use those things. The FIRO is also can be used together with the MBTI. The instruments are complementary in that they both have something to say or add to team development. What we recommend is layering the feedback from one instrument onto the other so that people can integrate the information and insights from both. Ideally, you'll choose the instrument that makes the most sense for what's going on with that team. Perhaps they've already had some MBTI exposure, so now you'd bring in the FIRO. Perhaps the issues that, as you're talking to the members of the team about what the issues and challenges are, perhaps they seem like they're things that are more FIRO relevant, and so you might start there. And other times you might start with the MBTI. There's no one best way. It's really up to you in deciding which one works best for the things that are challenging that particular team. For some people, the insights come from the MBTI. For other people, insights come from the FIRO, and for others, maybe they come from both. So sometimes we do a team event, and people are like, it didn't really work for me. That's where bringing in the FIRO later on might be really helpful, or vice versa, to give people a little bit more information about what's driving their behavior on this team. Ideally, you would use separate sessions for these. It's a lot of information to take in if you tried to do it all in one short session or even a day. And the deeper people understand the information, the more likely they are to make use of it. So I've kind of hit on a couple of these already. It's powerful to use both of these when you have the time in the sessions available to work with that group or the team. You only have time to do one, look at the issues, and decide which one makes the most sense. In general, the MBTI is more accessible for groups and individuals. The FIRO can feel a little bit more challenging in its content. There are people who might walk away thinking, low wanted affection is bad or something. It's important for them to understand that there is no good or no bad. But the MBTI, as you know, is really set up so that everything is very positive. But the FIRO, based on the culture and the group norms that are going on, there are some things that might be a little more challenging. And the FIRO is a great thing to introduce after people know their MBTI types, to take on other challenges that the MBTI might not be particularly helpful for. So how are they similar and how are they different? Well, they're similar in that both FIRO and MBTI are based on theory. Like I said, Schutz's theory for the FIRO came from his observations of submarine teams. MBTI theory is Isabel and Catherine's interpretation of Jung. Both are used for raising self-awareness of psychological processes, and I can't emphasize that enough. The idea of self-awareness is really the driver or the key underlying thing to growth and development from an individual perspective, and both help increase understanding of differences. It's that self-awareness and awareness of others that is really the key for both of these instruments. Insights are provided through a two-way feedback process. Just like with the MBTI, you want to walk people through the results, make sure they make sense. The FIRO does not have a self or a best fit type process per se, but no measurement instrument is perfect, and so if people disagree, you can negotiate that and see if having slightly different perception of their own scores helps them. What's key is that both of these instruments allow individuals to develop and flex in their behaviors. They both have deeper roots. Type dynamics underlies the MBTI approach to Jung, and the understanding yourself and your needs underlies the FIRO. So they provide a lot of depth and a lot of information, and are similar in those ways. But they also have a number of differences. So the MBTI is really kind of focused on this, how you use your cognition, decision making, taking information, that orientation to the outside world, whereas the FIRO really focuses on these interpersonal needs and those differences people have in those needs. The MBTI measures preferences, which you're all familiar with, whereas the FIRO's items are all about behaviors. Do you do this, and how often do you do this? The MBTI assumes that type comes from some sort of natural predisposition. The FIRO assumes that interpersonal needs are established early in life through your interaction with your environment. The MBTI assumes that type does not change, although there's a developmental model that goes with it, and people can predictably go through some stages in terms of how they use their preferences as they age. Whereas for the FIRO, we can assume that we can actually modify people's needs, but you need to do an awful lot of work to accomplish this. Similarly, with for MBTI, there's this best fit type process, whereas for the FIRO, there's not a best fit type process, but the scores can be used to challenge someone's own self-awareness and say, did you know you did this, and did you know you wanted these things? So whether you're working with individuals or teams or cultures, the FIRO can help you to empower individuals by increasing the understanding of cognitive styles and personal needs. It can help leaders to be self-aware, poised, and particularly intentional in their behavior. And through understanding of self and others, you can work with congruence and respect. And so what that means is that we can figure out a way, we can talk, we can negotiate, get to a point where I understand what you need, you understand what I need, and maybe I won't be able to do everything the way I want to, but we can arrive at a way forward that allows us both to be okay and feel as though our needs are at least being met, and we're at least aware of those differences. And you can get greater impact through involvement, influence, and connection in people's work. With that, I'm going to hand it back over to Kim to talk a little bit about the education.
Thank you, Rich. And before we get into our Q&A, I would like to share 2 limited time offers for the opportunity to save 10%. While I speak to this, please feel free to submit any additional questions, and we'll get into the Q&A in just a few minutes. So the first offer is around a FIRO certification and the opportunity to save 10%, as I mentioned, and a newly created FIRO facilitation workshop kit and feedback card bundle. And as you heard throughout the webinar, being FIRO certified enables you to use the FIRO insights to explore interpersonal needs with individuals and teams. And we have 2 upcoming training programs, one taking place in December 4th and 5th in Sunnyvale, California, which only has 8 seats remaining. And we also have a newly confirmed program on April 2nd and 3rd in Arlington, Virginia. And to learn more about the FIRO certification, you can visit the Myers-Briggs.com/FIRO certification. And again, now through November 25th, when you register and use promo code FIRO webinar, you can save the 10% off the registration fee. Simply add that promo code into the notes section of the form there. And so if you can advance the slide, Rich, you'll see some of the highlights and benefits to the FIRO certification course. And this is a separate certification as compared to any other certification, such as the MBTI, the Strong certification, CPI, etc. So the FIRO certification will go deep into how to administer the FIRO-B and FIRO business assessments and how to use the FIRO assessments as a catalyst for positive behavioral change and to unlock potential in the workplace and interactions, and many of the other highlights that have been shared on today's webinar. The next, as I mentioned, this product bundle provides an instant savings of 10%, and it's for those who are already FIRO certified. This is a ready-to-deploy workshop kit. It includes the facilitation kit plus the FIRO feedback cards, and these cards are an ideal facilitation tool to use both in individual feedback and coaching sessions. It includes a set of 53 cards that help guide exploration of the FIRO framework. And again, the bundle provides an instant savings of 10% when you compare them purchasing individually. And to find this product, you can search either on the Myers-Briggs.com or through your Elevate account by searching product 22250. So we have a great set of questions that have come through, and I'm going to begin with one of our first questions, which, Rich, I believe that you highlighted this, but if you could go over it one more time. Which assessment should be taken first between the MBTI and FIRO?
So, like I said before, it really is more about what's going on with that particular group or team. If you're working with an intact team and perhaps they face specific challenges where they are having issues with control issues or influence issues, somebody, there's 2 people trying to run the show, or they just don't seem to like each other, perhaps that's where you'd use the FIRO first to address maybe some of those interpersonal needs. If you're working with a group that doesn't necessarily have a whole lot of issues and challenges, I would then say start with the MBTI and layer the FIRO on secondarily. If you had, you're doing some sort of training that is proactive rather than reactive, well, we're just doing some training and we want to improve people's interpersonal skills. In that case, again, I would say start with the MBTI and then go to the FIRO. But it's really in those situations where the team has some challenges or a group has some challenges, and looking at what are the challenges they face would help you determine which would be the right one to start with.
Okay, great. And Lynn asks, how would you also have the instruments figure into developing high-performance teams in a continuous improvement environment? She states, I have used Tuckman's as well, and they all seem to set up well for continuous improvement.
If I'm understanding the question, most of the time, oftentimes I should say, um, a less than ideal approach is used with training and development. We have limited time, we have limited resources, and we'll often, we structure it. We have people come in, we do a session, and off they go. Ideally, you would have some check-in sessions, some check-in times, homework assignments that revolve from the different instrument that you're using. So, if, for example, you did a session with a team, Intech team on MBTI, then you'd give them some, they take some assignments. Well, I'm going to go and work with so-and-so who has opposite preferences and work really hard on trying to give them information in the way that they prefer, meaning I'm going to flex with them, and they're going to do the same with me. And then you check back in and see how that's working and then set some additional goals. And then you do the same with the FIRO. What we find in our work, looking at the application of all of these instruments really, and beyond even ours, is that the more time you spend thinking about it, talking about it, working with it, setting some goals for it, and then checking those behaviors, the more effective it is. When you just give a training and people walk away, oftentimes within a week or two, they struggle to remember what even happened because, there's so much other things going on in their life. So if you want to get real benefit from using assessments, which is our goal, you really should plan to have, the initial session and then follow-on sessions using some sort of action planning, SMART goals, whatever it is that works best for you. Have people keep it top of mind and make use of the information, and even get feedback. Well, how did that work? So you went, you did that. How did it feel for you? How did it feel for them? And then make modifications to that. Hopefully that answers the question. I wasn't exactly sure.
Lynn actually says perfect. Yes. Another question here is around, Alden asks, my typical MBTI intro session runs 4 hours. How long should I budget to introduce the FIRO?
I would say a minimum of 2, but 4 would probably be better. We do have some exercises. I mean, there's almost as much information in the FIRO as there is in the MBTI. We do have some exercises that we have in the materials that Kim's mentioned that help people get a deeper understanding of it. But like with most things, you can adjust to a 2-hour session. 4 would probably be ideal if you make use of the exercises and give people time to practice some of their skills.
All right. Thank you. Sandy asks, is this, meaning I'm assuming the FIRO, best for supervisors? I teach personal growth classes and use the MBTI to learn personality type, and students choose a career.
Can you repeat the first part of that again?
Is the FIRO assessment best for supervisors?
I wouldn't say it's best for supervisors. It's certainly useful for supervisors, but I think it's useful for all levels of the organization, senior executives all the way down to, for lack of a better term, the rank and file. Keeping in mind that for interpersonal needs are something we all have and we express at work. And even when I'm working with people where I'm not really on a team, so if you imagine we're just sharing physical space, right? We're in an open office, or my desk is near yours. To the extent that people interact with each other, those differences in those needs can actually create a lot of angst and resentment. One of the things I'll use here is that by way of example, if I have low expressed inclusion, I just kind of do what I'm going to do. I go off to lunch. I don't necessarily tell anybody or invite anybody, and I'm quite content with that. But people might just observe that behavior and say, well, wow, that guy's really a jerk. He never talks to anybody. He never does these things. And by understanding that, it's just, he's not really a jerk. He just doesn't do that. That's not what drives him. Some of those kind of unspoken hostilities and tensions can be dealt with. And that's relevant at all levels of the organization, because unless you work with no one, these different things can come into play.
Right. Okay. Jill asks, Has work been done on the application of the MBTI and FIRO in relationships outside of the workplace, i.e. relationship coaching?
It's a great question, and I can't definitively answer that. We have not done that kind of work within the company or any of our research affiliates, but that is not to say that others have not. I just don't know every article that's been done in literature, sorry. I can tell you that that people have looked at the FIRO when we haven't come to a commercial agreement, but they saw value in it. For example, in dating websites, years ago we had some ongoing negotiations with a now famous website. We just couldn't work out an arrangement, but they saw value in it. So that suggests to me that there is value for those kinds of non-work relationships as well as for work relationships. And just like with the MBTI, a lot of times people see a lot of value in understanding type in their interpersonal relationships outside of work. I don't see why that wouldn't be the case for the FIRO.
Okay, and Joe asks, what is the proper disposition for completing the FIRO instrument compared to that of the MBTI?
Well, for all personality assessments, they are sensitive to your mental state at the time. I won't go into a lot of details, but if something terrible has just happened in your life, any assessment, ours or anybody else's, is going to be sensitive to that. So the idea that with the MBTI, the shoes off self, you want to be in a relaxed kind of state of mind, not necessarily thinking about just work stuff. That would also generalize to the FIRO and any of the other assessments that you might take. If you're pressed for time, if something bad just happened, if you're stressed out, that's going to filter into how you respond and into those results. So I've really answered the question, but the shoes off self mindset works great for both of these.
Christy asks, any thoughts to creating a FIRO team report?
That's not my department. That's a terrible answer. I'm sorry, but I don't know that we have looked at that. I'm struggling to remember, Kim, what we have that might cover that. Is there anything on the product side you guys know?
That's something that we could definitely follow up on the different assessment options and report options. I mean,
yeah, I'm pretty sure there's not a straight up team report. We do offer, through services, we do offer aggregate summaries of FIRO results. If that was something you're interested in, people often will make a summary of a group of people, kind of like you do with the MBTI, where you put the names in the 16 boxes. With the FIRO, they'll put the names in the 6 boxes in the middle. People often will share and post on their door, here's my preference profile. That can be useful. I will tell you this, what we often see on the FIRO, because remember, for type, we're putting people into one of two, what I call buckets, dichotomies, preferences. For the FIRO, because those scores range from 0 to 9, and then if you're looking at the margins, if you remember that one sheet I showed where you score the total needs and the total expressed and the total, what we often see when we do those aggregates is you have somebody who's high and somebody who's low, and you tend to get mostly average scores. So it's probably more interesting to look at the frequencies than it is to look at the actual averages. And so, anyway, we do offer that, but it's not a team report per se.
Yeah, definitely. And of course, Christy, that's something that we'll share with our product team where a lot of that originates. And I know that there is not a specific FIRO team report. However, we do have a FIRO participating in teams booklet that may be of interest. But Christy shares that she creates a FIRO map during a session. Yet it would be nice to have the heavy lifting, as you mentioned, Rich, to generate by the computer. So the next question we have from Demi is, for conflict management issues, shall we use TKI or MBTI or FIRO, or we just combine all of the assessment tools together?
Each of those are going to provide you, depending on the level of conflict, each of the assessments would provide you with a different way of framing, thinking about, and trying to address the underlying source of the conflict. So the TKI is going to give you, here's your kind of go-to modes, and perhaps the part of the source of the conflict there is you've got a bunch of competitors and some accommodators, and the accommodators are unhappy with the competitors. Well, knowing that people have a go-to mode, and that, again, it's self-awareness and other awareness. Oh, geez, really? There are people who do that? Who knew? That can provide some insight. MBTI conflict is often about, how the different preferences are expressed. So, for example, someone who likes to have things done by a deadline and someone who's pressure-prompted P, they might have conflict about deadlines and things like that. For the FIRO, the conflicts will be slightly different in terms of, well, I feel left out. You wouldn't get I feel left out insight from TKI or MBTI, or I feel, unloved, if you will, for lack of a better term. You wouldn't get that from the TKI or the MBTI either. So each of these provides additional lenses and ways of looking at the underlying conflict. So if you used one and there was, that helps but doesn't quite get there, then you use the next. That helps, doesn't quite get there, and you can use the next, and hopefully you'll get closer to a high-performing, high-functioning team.
I think we have time for one more question. Why does the FIRO-B focus on these interpersonal needs? I thought it was a personality assessment.
It is sort of a personality assessment. I think of it as a personality assessment in that it's a different model. So back when Schutz was developing the FIRO, there were a lot of other needs models in place. Many of you are probably familiar with Maslow's hierarchy or Herzberg's two-factor theory. The idea of underlying needs which come from our development and personality were kind of in vogue at the time, and people, still to this day find value in all three of those different needs models, mostly because they help you understand and think about people differently than some other model might. So it is, to me, a personality measure in that those needs are part of what other people see and what drive you. A lot of times, one way to think about it is, and there's a great book out there by a guy named Robert Cialdini. He talks about click-whir behaviors, where something happens and you just react to it. You're not necessarily cognizant of why you're engaging in a behavior or why you're doing it. And personality, attitudes, needs, values, all of those things sort of drive that click-whir behavior. And by bringing why you do what you do to the surface, then you can start saying, I choose not to do it that way anymore, I choose to do it differently. I don't know if that answers the question, but that's kind of how I think about it in my head.
Thank you for that additional insight. And again, thank you, Rich, for the webinar today and even being a trooper through your cold. We have run out of time, and I want to thank everyone for attending and asking so many excellent questions. For all, please be on the lookout for the follow-up email later this week, which will include the presentation recording as well as some of the promotions that we highlighted today. Everybody enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.